On the 9th of July, 2006, in Berlin, an Italian defender named Fabio Cannavaro lifted the World Cup above his head. He was the captain. It was the greatest night of his life, and within months he would be crowned the best player on the planet. And yet, at that very same moment, back home in Italy, his club, Juventus, the biggest, richest, most successful team in the country, was being torn apart, stripped of its titles, thrown out of the Champions League, and relegated for the first and only time in its entire history to the second division in total disgrace. The same players in the same summer were heroes and villains at once. How is that even possible? Because Italian football had just been hit by the single biggest scandal in the history of club football. A scandal of secret phone calls, hand-picked referees, and a hidden system of power that ran the whole game from the shadows. This is Calciopoli. Explained. To understand it, you have to understand who ran Italian football in the early 2000s. Officially, nobody was more powerful than the Referees Committee and the Football Federation. Unofficially, the most powerful man in the country wore no whistle and sat on no board. His name was Luciano Moggi, the general manager of Juventus, and by many accounts, the puppet master of the entire Serie A. Moggi was a master of what Italians call il sistema, the system, a vast web of favors, threats, friendships, and fear that stretched into every corner of the sport. Agents, journalists, federation officials, and, most importantly of all, the men who decided which referee would officiate which match. And that last detail is the key to this entire story, because Calciopoli was not about handing a referee a briefcase of cash to fix a score. It was far more subtle and far more clever than that. And the reach of that system went further than referees. Moggi's influence bled into the transfer market itself. His son, Alessandro, helped run one of the most powerful player agency operations in the country, representing a huge number of Serie A footballers and coaches. Critics pointed to an obvious and troubling conflict. The family that helped run the biggest club in Italy was also, through that agency, wired into the careers of players and managers all across the league. When one family sits at that many tables at once, the club, the agents, the media, the ear of the men who pick the referees, you no longer really have a football league. You have a machine, and everyone else is just playing inside it. It began, as these things often do, completely by accident. Prosecutors in Naples were running a separate investigation, and as part of it, they were tapping phones, including the phone of Luciano Moggi. And what they started to hear, call after call, stopped them in their tracks. They heard Moggi speaking, on intimate and regular terms, with the two most important match officials in the country. Not referees, but the men whose job was to assign the referees, to decide who reffed what. Their names were Pierluigi Pareto and Paolo Bergamo, the referee designators of Serie A. And in these conversations, the balance of power was unmistakable. Moggi wasn't asking. Moggi was, in effect, steering, suggesting which officials should take Juventus's biggest games, complaining about the ones he didn't like. And, the transcripts suggested, making sure that referees who displeased him found themselves quietly punished, left off the big fixtures, sent to referee nothing games in the middle of nowhere. This was the genius and the poison of it. You did not need to bribe a referee to blow for a fake penalty. You simply needed to control which referee walked onto the pitch in the first place. Get the officials who owed you, who feared you, or who simply wanted to keep their prestigious appointments onto your most important matches, and let human nature do the rest. A generous decision here. A tight offside, given the benefit of the doubt there. Nothing so blatant that any single call looked like a crime. But over a whole season, across the biggest games, that invisible thumb on the scale could be worth everything. A title, a Champions League place, millions upon millions of euros. The wiretaps painted a picture of a sport where the outcome, at the very top, was being quietly shaped before a ball was even kicked. There were stories of referees pressured, of one official allegedly locked inside a dressing room, of SIM cards used to keep the conversations hidden. A secret command structure the Italian press would come to call La Cupola, the dome, sitting on top of the whole game. And then, in May 2006, it all exploded. The transcripts leaked to the newspapers. Italy woke up to read the private words of the men who ran its national sport. and the country was stunned. Because this was not some small provincial club fiddling a result. This reached the very summit. Juventus was at the center, but the investigation swept up others too. AC Milan, Fiorentina, Lazio, and Regina were all pulled into the storm. The most successful and glamorous names in Italian football, all standing accused. The reigning champions were suddenly suspects, and the Italian Federation, humiliated in front of the entire world, decided it had no choice but to come down with a hammer the sport had never seen before. The punishments were brutal, and for Juventus, they were historic. The club was stripped of the two league titles it had just won in 2005 and 2006. It was thrown out of the Champions League. And then came the sentence that had never, in over 100 years, been handed to a club of that size: relegation. Juventus, 9-time defending giants, home of some of the greatest players on earth, were sent down to Serie B, the second division, and docked points on top of it. AC Milan were docked points, but stayed up. Fiorentina and Lazio were punished heavily and narrowly escaped relegation on appeal. Regina were hit in a later wave, and Luciano Moggi, the puppet master, was banned from football for years. In a single summer, the map of Italian football had been redrawn by the courts. But here is the strangest part of the aftermath. The 2006 league title, taken from Juventus, was not left empty. It was handed to Inter Milan, the club that had finished third and who had not been convicted of running the scheme. And the 2005 title? That one was simply erased, left unassigned, a ghost championship belonging to no one that would never be celebrated by anybody, forever. Think about that. An entire season of football, at the highest level, officially declared to have no winner at all. For Juventus, the fallout was savage. The biggest stars ran for the exits: Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Fabio Cannavaro, Lilian Thuram, Gianluca Zambrotta, all leaving a club that could no longer offer them Champions League football or even top-flight football at all. But not everyone ran. And this is the part Juventus fans will tell you about with genuine pride. A core of legends chose to stay and go down into the second division with the club. The goalkeeper, Gianluigi Buffon, the captain, Alessandro Del Piero, the midfield engine, Pavel Nedved, the striker, David Trezeguet. Superstars, at the peak of their careers, playing in half-empty grounds in Italy's second tier, out of loyalty, and dragging Juventus straight back up at the first attempt. And now we come back to where we started, to the twist that makes this story almost impossible to believe. Because at the exact moment all of this was unfolding, the club destroyed, the titles erased, Italy went to the 2006 World Cup in Germany and won it, and the spine of that world champion team was made of Juventus players. The captain lifting the trophy, Fabio Cannavaro, was a Juventus man. The goalkeeper Buffon was a Juventus man. Del Piero, a Juventus man, scored in the semi-final. These were footballers being told back home that their club had cheated and must be cast into the second division, and they responded by becoming champions of the entire world. Cannavaro went on to win the Ballon d'Or, the best player alive, weeks after his club had been branded a disgrace. Heroes and villains, in the very same shirt, in the very same summer. And astonishingly, Italy had been here before. Back in 1980, a betting scandal known as Totonero rocked the same league and saw a young striker named Paolo Rossi banned from the game. 2 years later, freshly returned from that ban, Rossi fired Italy to victory at the 1982 World Cup as the tournament's top scorer and its greatest hero. A player disgraced at home, then crowned a champion of the world. If that pattern sounds familiar, it should, because Italian football, more than any other, seems to specialize in this exact, impossible whiplash between scandal and glory. But before you close the book on Juventus as the great villains of the tale, there is another side to this, and in Italy, it is argued about to this day. Because in the years that followed, more wiretaps came to light, and some of them involved other clubs, including Inter Milan, the very team that had been handed that 2006 title. Juventus supporters have argued, loudly and for nearly 2 decades, that they were not the only club with contacts inside the system, only the one made to pay the maximum price, while a rival was gifted a championship. And Luciano Moggi himself? After years of appeals and legal battles, the most serious case against him eventually ran into the statute of limitations. The clock simply ran out, and he walked away without a definitive criminal conviction. So the man at the center of the biggest scandal in club football history was punished by the sport, but never conclusively by the courts, which leaves the question that still splits Italy in two. Was Calciopoli a moment of justice? The day football finally caught the men rigging the game from the shadows and made an example of the biggest club of all? Or was it something murkier, a selective punishment, where one giant took the fall for a sickness that ran through the whole system, while others quietly benefited? Depending on which city in Italy you ask, you will get a very different answer, delivered with total conviction. What no one disputes is the scale of it. A scandal so big, it relegated the biggest club in the country, erased a league title from history entirely, and yet somehow shared a summer with those same players, lifting the World Cup. Football has never seen anything quite like it before or since, so I'll leave the verdict to you. Justice or a stitch-up? Tell me what you think down below, and subscribe, because there's a new story every week.